Daniel thought he was saving Emily. Instead, he was walking straight into the hands of a killer. What began as a simple act of kindness on a dark road would spiral into one of the most horrifying stories this small town had ever seen. You're watching Narrated Mysteries, where real stories of crime and tragedy are told in detail. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the darkest secrets hidden behind ordinary lives. The town of Brookhaven was the kind of place people passed through without much notice. It had a single main street lined with small shops, a diner that closed early, and neighbors who all knew one another by name. Life moved quietly, with little more than the occasional festival or Sunday gathering breaking the routine. To outsiders, it seemed peaceful, almost too perfect, but those who lived there understood that even the calmest places could hide secrets. The forests surrounding the town were vast and unwelcoming at night, with winding dirt roads that rarely saw traffic. Locals avoided them after dark, warning of wild animals and bad memories from unsolved disappearances that had happened years before. Though no one spoke of it openly, everyone remembered the missing hikers, the lost travelers, and the few who had left home only to never return. These stories had turned into whispered warnings passed down to newcomers, reminders that Brookhaven's tranquility was fragile. Daniel, a mechanic who grew up in the town, knew these stories well. He had worked long hours in his small garage, fixing engines for neighbors and earning a reputation as dependable and kind. His life was ordinary, predictable, and uneventful until the night everything changed. The road he traveled home on was familiar, cutting through the edge of the forest where shadows stretched unnaturally long under the dim glow of streetlights. It was here, on this quiet stretch, that fate would intervene. He had no way of knowing that a single choice, a moment of compassion, would open the door to something far darker than the town's old rumors. In Brookhaven, the calm was not safety, it was a mask, and behind it, danger waited for anyone who let their guard down. Daniel had driven that road countless times, usually without seeing another soul. On this particular night, the air was heavy and the silence deeper than usual, broken only by the hum of his engine. As he rounded a bend, his headlights cut through the darkness and revealed a figure standing by the side of the road. A car sat crooked on the shoulder, its hood raised as if abandoned in a hurry. The woman beside it looked uneasy, shifting from one foot to the other, her face pale under the dim light. She raised her hand slowly, signaling for help, her movements hesitant, almost desperate. Daniel slowed to a stop, his instincts pushing him to roll down the window. The woman explained her car had stopped working and she had no phone to call. Anyone? There was a tremor in her voice, something that made her seem both frightened and vulnerable. To him, she looked like someone who had been stranded far too long, waiting for a stroke of luck. The woods behind her loomed dark and endless, adding to the sense of unease. Without thinking much about the danger, Daniel stepped out to help. He checked under the hood, fiddled with the engine, but nothing seemed to work. She stood close by, glancing nervously at the trees as though she expected someone or something to emerge. Daniel felt the pressure of the situation building. The road was empty, no other cars in sight, and the nearest gas station was miles away. He knew leaving her there wasn't an option. When he offered her a ride into town, she hesitated before nodding. She climbed into his car quietly, clutching her small bag tightly in her lap. What Daniel didn't realize was that by letting her in, he was also letting in the beginning of his own nightmare. The drive began in silence, the road stretching endlessly ahead, with only the occasional flicker of headlights bouncing off the trees. Daniel tried to make the atmosphere less tense by asking where she lived, but her answers were short, almost rehearsed, as if she wanted to share as little as possible. She called herself Emily, saying she had been on her way home when her car broke down. She spoke quickly, her words clipped, and Daniel noticed the way her eyes darted to the mirrors, checking behind them as though she feared being followed. Her hands never left the bag in her lap. fingers wrapped around the strap with a grip so tight, her knuckles turned pale. Daniel brushed off his unease, convincing himself it was normal for someone stranded alone at night to act nervous. Still, the longer she sat beside him, the more he noticed small details that didn't add up. Her clothes looked slightly worn, not the kind of outfit most people wore for an evening drive. Her shoes were caked with dirt, as though she had been walking through the woods rather than waiting by the roadside. Every so often, she would lean forward, scanning the road ahead, only to sink back into her seat when she saw nothing. The forest around them seemed endless, pressing in closer with every mile. The silence in the car grew heavier, broken only by the steady sound of tires rolling against gravel. Daniel felt the tension build in his chest, an uneasiness he couldn't explain. Something about this woman's presence didn't feel right, yet his sense of duty kept him driving. To him, this was still about doing the right thing, helping a stranger in need. What he couldn't see was that the danger wasn't ahead of him. It was already sitting in the passenger seat. As the miles slipped away, Daniel's uneasiness grew harder to ignore. Emily shifted constantly in her seat, glancing over her shoulder at the darkness behind them, then pressing her bag tighter against her chest. Her breathing came in shallow bursts, as though she was bracing herself for something. Daniel noticed her trembling hands, but what unsettled him most was her silence. She wasn't just nervous, she seemed terrified of something that wasn't there. Or maybe, he thought uneasily, something that was. The road narrowed as they moved deeper into the wooded stretch between towns. The trees grew taller, their branches arching overhead, casting long shadows that flickered with every movement of the headlights. Daniel tried to convince himself that her behavior was natural. Stranded alone at night, far from help, anyone would be uneasy. But the thought wouldn't leave him that she wasn't afraid of being stranded. She was afraid of being found at one point. Emily startled so violently at the sound of a distant owl that she nearly dropped her bag. Daniel caught a glimpse of its contents as it shifted open for only a second. Thick gloves, worn but clean, and something folded neatly, like a map or a note. Before he could make sense of it, she snapped the bag shut, her eyes cutting toward him with a sharpness that made his stomach tighten. He gripped the steering wheel harder, telling himself not to ask questions. The sooner he got her to town, the sooner this strange ride would end. Yet, as the forest closed in around them, and Emily's paranoia seemed to swell with every passing minute, Daniel couldn't help but feel that he wasn't driving her to safety at all. He was being pulled into something far beyond his understanding, and there was no easy way out. When the glowing lights of a small gas station finally appeared in the distance, Daniel felt a wave of relief. It was the first sign of life after miles of dark, empty road. He pulled in beside one of the pumps and told himself this stop would bring the uneasy ride to an end. Maybe she could call someone. Maybe he could finally breathe. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint hum of insects. Daniel stepped out, stretching his legs as he filled the tank. Inside the station, he paid quickly, glancing back toward the car to see Emily sitting motionless, her hands gripping the bag tighter than ever. But when he returned, the passenger seat was empty. The door hung slightly open, swinging in the night breeze. For a moment, Daniel thought she had simply gone inside, but the station clerk shook his head when asked if a woman had entered. Confusion turned to dread as he walked back to the car and noticed the bag still resting on the seat. Carefully, he opened it. Inside were no personal belongings, no wallet, no phone, nothing to suggest who Emily really was. Instead, there was a pair of dark gloves folded neatly, and beneath them, a sheet of paper folded into a sharp square. Daniel unfolded it with trembling hands. Written in smudged ink were directions, leading deep into the woods outside of town. At the top, a single word was scrawled, cabin. His first instinct was to leave it all behind, to drive away and never think about this strange woman again. Yet something gnawed at him, a mix of fear and curiosity he couldn't shake. Why had she vanished? Why leave this note behind? Against his better judgment, Daniel made the choice that would seal his fate. He turned the key in the ignition and began following the directions. The road leading out of town grew narrower with every turn, the pavement giving way to gravel that crunched beneath Daniel's tires. His headlights cut through the trees, their beams swallowed quickly by the dense woods. The directions on the paper were oddly specific: left, at the leaning oak, straight past the broken fence, right where the road seemed to disappear. Each landmark was there, waiting for him, as if someone had carefully planned the path he was meant to follow. With each mile, the silence outside thickened, broken only by the occasional cry of an unseen animal. Daniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He tried to convince himself this was nothing more than a strange coincidence, that Emily had left in a hurry, and the note was unrelated. But deep down, he knew better. The bag, the gloves, the urgency in her eyes, none of it had been random. This was deliberate, and now he was part of it. The path ended in a clearing, and there it stood, a cabin. Its wooden frame sagged with age, the windows boarded up, the roof half collapsed on one side. The place looked abandoned, yet something about it felt alive, as if it had been waiting for him. His headlights washed over the door, revealing deep scratches in the wood, like marks left behind by desperate hands. Daniel killed the engine and sat in silence, listening to his own breathing. The forest pressed close around him, heavy and suffocating. Every instinct told him to leave, but the pull of curiosity anchored him to the spot. Slowly, he stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots echoing too loudly in the still night. Ahead of him, the cabin loomed, silent and watching, promising answers he wasn't ready to face. The cabin's door creaked open, with a reluctant groan, releasing a stale wave of air that smelled of damp wood and something metallic beneath it. Daniel hesitated at the threshold, shining his phone's flashlight into the gloom. The beam illuminated a floor coated in dust, except for a narrow trail of footprints that led deeper inside. He followed them cautiously, his pulse quickening with every step. The interior was worse than he imagined. Chains hung from iron bolts drilled into the floor, their ends stained dark with what could only be old blood. The walls bore deep scratches, not from animals but from fingernails dragged across the wood. A table stood in the corner, cluttered, with yellowed photographs, each one showing faces he recognized from missing persons posters that had once circulated in Brookhaven. The images were old, faded, but the despair in the eyes of the people was unmistakable. Daniel's stomach turned when he saw Emily among them. In the photograph, she looked younger, her expression lifeless, her skin pale in a way that suggested she had been gone for years. The realization hit him hard. Whoever he had picked up on the roadside wasn't Emily. It had been someone else entirely, using her image as bait. On the floor near the photographs lay a small pile of personal belongings, wallets, bits of clothing, all taken from victims who had never made it home. The silence inside the cabin grew heavier, pressing against Daniel's chest. He felt as though unseen eyes were watching him, waiting for him to understand the truth. This wasn't a place of shelter. It was a trap, carefully designed to lure in the unsuspecting. By stepping inside, he had crossed a line he could never retreat from. The nightmare had only just begun. The moment Daniel turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind him with a violent crash that echoed through the cabin. He lunged forward, grabbing the handle, but it refused to budge. Panic surged as he pulled harder, the wood groaning, but not giving way. The air inside seemed to thicken, carrying with it the faintest sound of movements, soft, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the shadows. His flashlight beam shook as he scanned the room, catching glints of metal from the chains and the stark white of old photographs staring back at him. The place was no longer silent. It breathed with him, every creak of the wooden floorboards sounding like footsteps, drawing closer. His heart hammered in his chest as the realization settled over him. Emily's appearance on the road had never been an accident. The broken car, the helpless act it, was all staged to bring him here. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities, searching for a way out. He shoved against a boarded window, but the planks were nailed tight, reinforced from the outside. The walls seemed to close in, the air colder, heavier. Then he noticed something that made his stomach twist, a fresh set of muddy footprints leading across the cabin floor. Not his own. They disappeared into the darkness at the far end, near a half-open doorway that seemed to swallow the light. The sense of being hunted became impossible to ignore. He was no longer an intruder in an abandoned place. He was prey in a carefully built trap, caught exactly where someone wanted him. Every choice he made now felt like a step deeper into the jaws of something merciless, and he understood that whoever had lured him here wasn't far away. They were already inside with him. From the corner of the cabin, a figure emerged, stepping into the weak beam of Daniel's flashlight. The shape was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothing that seemed to swallow the light. A mask covered the face, plain and expressionless, its blankness more unsettling than any twisted grin could have been. In one gloved hand, the stranger held a length of chain, letting it drag across the wooden floor with a slow scraping sound that filled the silence. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He backed away, but the man's movements were deliberate, unhurried, like a predator, confident in the certainty of its kill. Each step seemed to echo forever, pounding in time with Daniel's racing pulse. The photographs, the chains, the bloody stains on the floor, they all snapped together in his mind. This wasn't just a random killer. This was someone who had been doing this for years. Someone skilled at using fear like a weapon. The figure stopped just short of the light, head tilting as though studying him. Then, with one swift motion, the man threw the chain onto the table where the photographs lay. The sound was sharp, commanding a warning that Daniel was exactly where he was meant to be. Behind the mask, there was no voice, no sound of breath, only silence, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but the cabin felt like a maze designed to trap him. The boarded windows, the locked door, the shadows pressing in on every side left him with nowhere to turn. The figure didn't rush forward. He didn't need to. The terror was enough to bind Daniel tighter than any chain. For the first time, Daniel realized that what he was facing wasn't just a killer, it was a hunter, and he had already been claimed as the next victim. Daniel's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He lunged toward the nearest boarded window, ramming his shoulder against the wood. The planks rattled but didn't break, the nails holding firm. The sound drew a response, sharp, deliberate step forward from the masked figure. Panic surged through Daniel, forcing him to grab a chair and hurl it across the room. It shattered against the wall, fragments scattering across the floor. He wasn't fighting just for freedom anymore. He was fighting for his life. The hunter advanced without a word, moving with the calm certainty of someone who had played this game countless times before. Each step pushed Daniel deeper into desperation. He stumbled over the broken chair, then snatched up one of the splintered legs, clutching it like a weapon. His heart pounded so loudly it drowned out every other sound. When the masked man lunged, Daniel swung wildly, the wood connecting with a dull crack against the hunter's arm. For the briefest moment, there was a pause, a stagger, a grunt muffled by the mask. Hope flared, but it died just as quickly when the man straightened and pressed forward, unfazed, relentless. Daniel scrambled backward, knocking over the table of photographs. Images of the missing scattered across the floor, like silent witnesses. To his struggle, the chains bolted into the floor, clanged as Daniel tripped against them, barely keeping his balance. The killer moved faster now, forcing him toward the narrow hallway. Daniel lashed out again, his improvised weapon splintering further, his strength dwindling. Every breath burned in his lungs, every movement more frantic. The cabin wasn't just closing in on him, it was consuming him, sealing him inside a nightmare with no clear escape. And with every second, the hunter grew closer, his silence more terrifying than any scream. Daniel burst through a narrow doorway at the back of the cabin, his shoulders slamming into the weakened wood until it gave way. Cold night air rushed over him as he stumbled into the forest. For a fleeting moment, relief surged through him. He was outside, free from the suffocating walls of that cursed place. But the sound that followed shattered that hope. Heavy footsteps crashing against the cabin floor, then spilling out into the darkness behind him. The hunter was coming, and he wasn't far. Branches whipped across Daniel's face as he sprinted blindly into the trees. The forest was a maze, thick and unforgiving, every shadow stretching into something monstrous. His lungs burned with each gasp of air, his legs trembling from exhaustion, but the sound of pursuit never faded. The killer didn't rush. He followed steadily, methodically, as if confident that Daniel's strength would fail before his own. Daniel's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Pain shot through his chest as he scrambled to his feet, desperate to keep moving. The faint glow of dawn bled into the horizon, offering the smallest sliver of hope. If he could just reach the edge of the forest, maybe someone would see him, maybe someone would hear. He forced himself onward, crashing through undergrowth, his vision swimming from fatigue. Then, through the trees, he spotted a shallow ditch cutting through the earth, a potential hiding place. Without thinking, he dropped into it, pressing himself against the damp soil, holding his breath as the footsteps drew closer. The forest fell silent again, except for the pounding of his heart. Daniel lay frozen, praying the hunter would pass him by. But in his gut, he knew the silence wasn't safety. It was the pause before the end. Morning light stretched across the forest, cutting through the mist that clung low to the ground. A pair of hikers followed a narrow trail, their voices carrying softly in the cool air, until one of them stopped abruptly, down in a shallow ditch. Something pale caught the sunlight. At first, it looked like discarded clothing, but as they drew closer, the truth revealed itself. Daniel's body lay crumpled against the earth, his skin cold, his throat cut with chilling precision. The ground around him was stained dark, a silent record of his final moments. Beside him, half buried in the dirt, was the folded piece of paper he had found in the bag. The ink was smudged, but still legible. The word cabin circled harshly, as if mocking him. One of the hikers reached down, hands trembling, and lifted it free. That single sheet connected his death to a trail of disappearances, stretching back years, disappearances that no one had ever solved. What disturbed investigators most wasn't just the brutality of his death, but the absence of any other evidence. The killer had vanished, leaving no footprints, no fingerprints, nothing beyond what Daniel had left behind. It was as though the figure in the mask had dissolved back into the woods, waiting for the next victim to take the same wrong turn. In Brookhaven, whispers soon returned. People spoke of the woman on the roadside, the bait no one could resist. They spoke of the cabin, hidden deep in the forest, where chains still hung from the floor, and photographs of the missing gathered dust. Daniel's story became another warning, another shadow on the town's quiet streets. He had stopped to help someone he thought was in danger, and in doing so, walked straight into horror. The predator remained free, unseen, and always watching.